Thank you. Thank you very much for this occasion in this beautiful place and extraordinary city. I'm a mathematician, and I will take a peculiar perspective, entirely based on some deep intuition by Gould about the role of contingency in evolution, in particular in the problem of the increasing complexification of life. This picture is from Gould's hypothetical evolutionary tree. Gould is criticizing this tree that he presents and contraposes to his views on evolution. This tree happens to be exactly the one presented not by common knowledge, but in a scientific manner by a very strong trend in biology, which mostly began with Darcy Thompson, Turing, and René Thom. This work, that I would roughly refer to the dynamicist work, is largely based on a physical analysis of some components of organisms. It originated, I think that the real technical pioneer is Alan Turing, much more deeply than Darcy Thompson, by the analysis of the formation of shapes and colors in some organs. René Thom is the other great name in this frame, but more recent authors, Richard Gordon, Daniel Meinhardt, and Vincent Fleury, developed this analysis of organ, and in the last case in particular, but the three of them extended it to organisms and their evolution. I won't say much about the relevant and the most important part of their work on organs. Let me tell you the motivation of this kind of analysis, which I think is quite interesting. It's totally incomplete in my perspective. However, it says something. It is analysis of organs which are dedicated to the exchange or production of energy and matter. In this case, in a sense, physics dominates. Physics shapes the organ. So you have fine analysis of the formation of the vascular system along embryogenesis, the sprouting, which is given by the flow pushed by the heart, the formation of the lungs, and the derivation of the fractal number of lungs in mammals, which are quite fair. They are not exact. The lungs have lots of variability and lots of differences. Yet, one really understands something about the role of physics shaping those organs where, again, this is the key point, energy and matter are exchanged or produced. Then, of course, there are plenty of corrections to be made, because then there is variability, there is diversity, and a lot more. In general, these colleagues of ours, who are excellent mathematicians and physicists, basically disregard contingency, which is noise, which is against the stability. That's the general attitude, and René Thom represents the highest point, with deep mathematics in this direction, but I think a really incomplete understanding of biology. It's more than inadequate is incompleteness. Those colleagues are missing something. Typically, cells for them are like little bullets that are shaped by physical forces. It happens that cells in an organism are proliferating with variation and move, which changes the situation. The point then, and that's where I will really start my presentation, is that these analyses have been extended to evolution by some very rich nonlinear dynamics. Again, these approaches are far away from naive. There is nothing like, the shallow stuff, the DNA is a program or things like that, not at all. These analyses use rich nonlinear dynamics with lots of bifurcation, homoclinic points, but with the idea that the shapes are determined again in a nonlinear way, very rich way, and determined and a priority. And a priority there, they even say that the genes takes the possible path already given by the structure of determination of the physical mathematical assumptions. They even justify this approach by some remarks by Darwin, like this one, that animals are descended from at most only 4 or 5 progenitors, and plants from an equal or lesser number. This justifies the idea that there are only few possibilities that are entirely pre-given by the physical-mathematical determination, within which, of course, there is an exploration with some selection at the end. Gould radically disagrees from this perspective, and after presenting the tree I just gave goes to another kind of tree, largely motivated, or first motivated by his analysis of Burgess Fauna in Wonderful Life. As we know, that's been a work of about 100 years on this fauna, and giving an enormous amount of specimens. For example, typically as for the bow plants, which will be a main issue in this presentation, the bow plants, there are only 4 survivors out of 20 arthropods. And even worse for echinoderms, 5 major groups today, while in lower Paleozoic rocks, those that were extinct at the time of Burgess extinction, there were about 20 to 30 basic groups, bow plants, with even very strange 3-part symmetries, or skewer-like spirals. But this phenomenon is not only present there, and again, one can find similar phenomena at the same time in Xinjiang fauna, where again, there's an incredible proliferation of bow plants that are no longer there. Only few remain. So Darwin's remark is not wrong. But the point is that the exploration has been much broader than what we can see from today's remains of the bow plants. Let me show you some images. Again, these are from Wonderful Life. Probably many of you know of our Leucinogenia, incredible bow plants, and this strange animal here, Odontogryphus, and these also are animals attached to the ground, but they're animals. And this one, all plants that don't exist anymore, body plants that don't exist anymore. This is another famous case. It seems that there are 5 eyes and a strange protuberance there in an existing bow plant today. And more here. The point is that in this analysis, what I will stress is what Gould calls contingency, so the role of randomness, including in exploring the bow plants. There is no doubt that these bow plants, this body structure, cannot be incompatible with physical forces. Gravitation is there, you have to follow it. The attitude must be very different with respect to the dynamicist analysis. You see, the physico-mathematical determinations aims, since Galileo and Newton, by the explicit equational determination to spell out the causes. If you write F equal ma, you can read it like a force causes an acceleration. In relativity theory, you will revert it, but again, that's really the aim of intelligibility given by the physical mathematical determination. And these people work very soundly in this frame. It happens, as I said before, that cells are not little bullets. They proliferate with variation and they move. So these constraints must be understood as such. They are constraints. They're not pulling forces. And it is proliferation with variation. Darwin says reproduction with modification that is underlying these physical constraints that are there, of course. And then there is randomness in this exploration. And not only the nonlinear randomness proper to those chaotic dynamics, because they are very rich dynamics, but there is also a lot of more in biological entities. First of all, because there are quantum events at the cellular level, quite plenty. They superpose to the classical ones, and this is very original from the physical mathematical point of view. You know, classical and relativistic physics are not unified with quantum mechanics. One of the consequences is that there are two forms of randomness because of the lack of unified fields. So physicists never work in a situation like it happens in a cell, within a cell, where a quantum event may be amplified by a classical one and vice versa. Classical and quantum randomness interfere. Marcello Ruiat and I wrote a paper giving lots of examples where this is nowadays well known. In particular, in the last 7-8 years, there's been a lot of work of quantum effects in a cell, which again superpose with classical dynamics and its effects. This manifests itself at various levels, as we heard in more than one talk here, the relevance of the interaction between the different level of organizations within an organism, of the organism with the niche with the ecosystem, and vice versa. These are forms of integration and regulation. Marcello and I call this bioresonance. In which sense? You see, these classical dynamics in their richness started by Poincaré's work at the end of the 19th century, where he observed that the resonance effects between the planets were destabilizing the equilibrium dynamics. The dynamics is at equilibrium, but is very unstable. Why? Because the gravitational effects interact. And the level of determination is just one, just a few equations by Newton and Laplace. Yet, you have a resonance which produces randomness. Now, in biology, this is not only one level of determination, whether it is mathematized or not. There are many, because you have the molecular level, interacting cells that are in a tissue, that are in an organ, that retroacts on the tissue, on the cells, on the molecular level. And this is all in an organism and so on. So it's a very original situation where these various level organizations stabilize and destabilize each other, because a minor change in one of these levels may induce major changes in the others, and also can stabilize it, can damp fluctuations. So this is behind the contingency, which goes well beyond the purely nonlinear dynamics. This is why Gould is perfectly right to contrapose to the dynamicist tree his own tree that he bases on empirical evidence and paleontological evidence. But I think there are theoretical reasons for it to be like that, as I tried to say. And then, of course, Darwin's remark is not wrong, in the sense that if you look at today's bioplants, they only derive from a few. But after a massive selection of a rich variety of bioplants, based on random exploration, including of bioplants themselves. However, there is something more to be discussed, and I will mention now two aspects of contingency, which I will call contingency 1 and 2. The first one is that is what Gould calls the Burgess enigma. The sweep anatomical variety reached the maximum right after the initial diversification of multicellular animals. The later history of life proceeds by elimination, not expansion. That's okay, seems to be a fact. The current Earth may hold more species than ever before, but most are iterations upon a few basic anatomical designs. This is summarizing what I said before. The great anatomical disparity among Burgess arthropods is therefore not a simple adaptive response to a wider range of environments available at this early time. Somehow, the same basic scope of opportunity originally elicited a far greater range of anatomical experimentation. Same ecological world, very different kind of evolutionary response. This situation defines the enigma of Burgess fauna. So we have this peculiar situation of an enormous exploration, contingent, random exploration of diversity, in particular, of diversity of bioplants. And where is the challenge here? Is that along evolution, there is on one side a reduction of bioplants, of body plants, on the other, and that's what Gould stresses clearly in posing the Burgess enigma, there is an increasing diversity of species. As I quoted before, never as now, we had so many different species, and an increasing complexity. This is the other key issue that I will focus on. I will discuss this point about complexity, that I will refer to contingency 2, and develop an analysis on Gould's remarks on contingent random increase of complexity of phenotypes. Unfortunately, Gould, in these major books about this, Full House in particular, and One Full Life, never gives an exact definition of what complexity could be. There is some reference to the number of tissues, number of organ-connected components, networks. You find here, there, countable complexity of interfaces. These are very good intuition, must be specified. I will try to do it. Of course, it's a fundamental thing to be understood. More complex, however, any way you define it, doesn't mean more fit or anything like that. You know, the fittest guys here are the bacteria. They are there since always. They are 50% of the biomass. They will survive us for sure, because we are making a mess of the ecosystem. Why? They will make through it. So it's really not a matter of fitness. In no way you mention it. It's just a matter of trying to count, to put a number on some anatomy of animals in particular. In order to understand this, we have really to change perspective, and that's what I call the core contingency issue, which personally I find in Gould, but it's my proposal, and that many of you agree and many elaborated already, but let's be more explicit. Randomness in biology is not noise, as our colleagues dynamicists understand it, okay? Think of the work of René Thom, entirely a fight to understand structural stability in spite of noise. No, because randomness is behind variability, is the origin of variability, is a component of variability, which is a component of diversity, which is a component of structural stability. A species, a population, an ecosystem, an organism is stable also because it's diverse. Diversity for an ecosystem, a species, an organism is part of stability. This is radically different from the physicalist approach, okay? You may have stability in physics by statistical reasons, but this is a wonderful remark by Schrödinger in his little book, What is Life, that you cannot have stability by statistical reasons because it's small numbers. You have the stability of these people stable in terms of quantum mechanics, and, well, you don't understand it very well. But anyway, this stability because immense numbers of atoms, okay? A population may be a small number. There's a number of molecule types in a cell may be a small one, or the molecules of a type, 100. And yet, you have a stability of molecules of a given type. So there is a stability due to variability, due to diversity, which is a very original, peculiar situation of life phenomena. I think we have to change perspective in this, the same way as people did in quantum mechanics. You know, it was not obvious, and many people still don't digest it, to believe, to consider that indetermination is intrinsic to the theory. So the theory includes probability and indetermination. It belongs to the structure of determination in quantum mechanics. That's why we think that a close analysis of the form of randomness may be brought inside the theory and contribute to the understanding of stability, of structural stability at all levels of organization. I will now develop what I call the contingency 2 point, again, elaborating on both Full House and Marvelous Life, but also there are several papers by Gould, but those are the main references, concerning the increasing complexity and diversity in evolution. As we are all against this image, we all very well, that's one of major fights by Gould to claim that, of course, it is not like that. However, in Full House, which is very complex book because he keeps thinking while writing, so you see the evolution of thinking. It's beautiful in a sense. There's too much about football, American football, and baseball. It was very boring, that part. Anyway, he likes it very much, so we had to accept that 1/3 of the book is about baseball. There is though, beautiful analysis and also an implicit mathematical insight. There is no mathematics, but there is something to be developed, which I will hint here, which is really some sort of original mathematics. So this is a major painting he makes there, major drawing, based on paleontological evidence, you see. This is the situation of the Precambrian, this is the situation, he says, of present. Unfortunately, in this discussion, time is not so much correlated to this mathematical insight, what I will try to correct. For example, what are the dinosaurs doing there at present is not very clear. Well, you know, anyway, it is proposing ideas, not always in a perfectly coherent way. I will correct this by clarifying the issue. And then there are also another fundamental image. Let me explain what this is. This is the complexity, even though not fully defined in his books. I will try to define it more closely. Here is the biomass, call it by frequency of individuals or whatever, it doesn't matter. Is the biomass, and this is the diffusion of biomass of a complexity. Here is another beautiful drawing where Gould explains that this increase of complexity cannot be a biased one, say because God decides that you have to get more complex. Because if it were biased, they would have this shape. This is the complexity, and here is time. So over time, you would lose the very simple guys as being too stupid. No, it is not like that, but it is more like this. Bacteria is still there. Yet, there is an irregular and random increasing of complexity. This is again complexity, here is time. This is the actual situation that he calls an asymmetric diffusion due to the left wall of bacteria here. Gould considers bacteria to be the least possible complexity for living organisms. One may discuss whether viruses are not alive or not. If you prefer, you can put viruses there as a left wall. It doesn't change very much the analysis. Let me try to make a close analysis now, at least give some hints. There is a lot of work I will refer to and not really mentioned here. First of all, one should distinguish between what we like to call, in a paper here long ago, objective complexity, because somewhere Gould says that after all, the complexity of an eukaryotic cell is not very different from that of an elephant. Yes, from point of view of functional or objective complexity, say the metabolic processes are there, the production of energy, so mitochondria, their activity, and the existence of different level organization. You have organelles inside, so indeed there are already the basic element of the complexity of an organism. However, there is another notion of complexity, that is phenotypic complexity, or epistemic if you want. Epistemic because you decide, for example, to count the different tissues, okay, is a matter of epistemic approach. Roughly, it may amount to several combinatorics, different tissues. You may count them, agreeing whether two tissues are different or not, but roughly you can say that. Topological forms and structures. Again, you can associate numbers here. Connexity, for example, connexity of organs. A cow or a horse has 400 muscles. A primate has 600 muscles. Well, mostly because of this. 600 is bigger than 400. You can say it's more complex. Networks, typically networks of cells. The most important network, neural network. You can count the nodes, you can count the connections, you can associate a number. This is the phenotypic connection. Now, this increases. That's the fundamental point. How comes? Well, you cannot explain that just by random mutations, because a priori, they go in all directions. There is no reason why mutation should induce complexification. You cannot explain it by selection, because as I said before, selection doesn't force you to be more complex in no way, because the bacteria are still there, because I don't know, I've been told recently that the lizard cannot run and breathe at the same time. Its brain, its neural system is so simple that it cannot do the two things at a time. So, but it's still there since 150 million years. So it's not selection acting per se toward a greater complexity. Gould's idea is the symmetry breaking in unit diffusion. I will try to derive Gould's empirical remark, so to give it a general sense, theoretical sense, from some general mathematical principle by specifying where this happened, the right phase space, and make explicit the time dependence, which is not taken carefully enough by this very preliminary, beautiful, but incomplete exploration in the books by Gould. This will be analyzed in terms of a diffusion equation, where any diffusion, this is a key point, any diffusion goes along random path, like diffusion of a gas or whatever, or heat or anything. Let me just give you the definitions, then I won't give any more mathematics. A tentative distinction of complexity in three components can be the following. You can consider the combinatorial complexity, as I said before, differentiations in an organism, in embryogenesis, the phenotypic complexity as the topological form and structures, the fractal numbers. Again, by the work of dynamicists, one can associate a fractal number to the lungs of mammals, which is 2.6, at the fractal number to the vascular system, which is 3.2, I think, fractal dimension. A frog has a lung, which is a little ball, so the fractal dimension is 2. 2 is less than 2.6, so you can associate numbers and say this is bigger than that. And a very important one are the numbers associated to networks. You can put a weight there. This is far away from a complete description of complexity. This is skeleton of what complexity could be. Much more can be added. The key point is that this is an anatomical, static picture. It is not an analysis of organization. It's an analysis of anatomical complexity. It's for the dead animal, in a sense, that you're seeing there, these measures. The idea we borrowed goes back to Schrödinger, not Schrödinger of what is life, but Schrödinger of the equation. Why? Because what is the dairy point that really made the revolution in quantum mechanics? In the 20s, Schrödinger realizes that there is no way to describe the trajectory of a quantum. Quanta don't go like that, don't go along trajectories. So he invented a mathematical determination of not the trajectory of a quantum. The determination, the equational determination, is a determination of a low probability, more precisely, a density of probability. This is really revolutionary. It's not the particle that goes like that. It is a low probability that goes like that. Then when you take a measure, you will have a value of probability. This is Schrödinger revolution, and the Nobel Award he got for this is fully motivated. You see, it's a radical change of perspective. I can have a determination also in quantum mechanics, but of a low probability. So by inspiring from that, we analyze complexity, where evolution from a very global perspective, really like Gould's in that schematic drawing, is seen as the dynamics of a potential of variability. Biomass is a potential of variability. Just think of it from very far, without details, what happens by the growth of biomass, that you have an increasing potential of variability, whatever it is behind it. Disregard the causes behind it, like Schrödinger did. Just make an insight from far away and describe evolution as the dynamics of a potential variability. Of course, the point is to understand what replaces the state function or the wave function in Schrödinger, and that's to be understood. What's biomass and exactly in which spaces this takes place, because diffusion. And the suggestion comes from Gould. This drawing seems to be just a naive empirical drawing, but indeed it's a very original idea of inventing an original phase space. Diffusion doesn't take place in space, like usually diffusion in physics. They take place in space or in another matter, which is also space. In this case, the diffusion of the biomass is over a complexity to be defined. This is very abstract and very original. So what we did, we wrote the equation inspired by Schrödinger to have a linear term that's very important, the source term. Due to the original asymmetry, we got the solution, which gives, and that's a recent work, a revision of early work with Francis Bailly, which gives this drawing, which first of all puts time here. This is the time from the beginning of life till today. It soundsly represents the original explosion of life when bacteria with no constraints expand exponentially. Then they start to differentiate and compete. They decrease, but they get more complex metabolic activities, more complex membrane, and so on, up to the current situation where the diffusion, because it is asymmetric, propagates the asymmetry towards the right. This is just a mathematical understanding based on basic principles, purely mathematical principles of Gould's intuition. When you have a diffusion which is asymmetric, by local random interaction, the asymmetry is propagated. This is a way one can understand it biologically. I don't know how this is sound, but it may be. And the way is the following. When you have the random changes along evolution, proliferation with variation, then the exploration goes in all directions from the point of view of complexity, but locally, the niches for the more simple animals may be already occupied. So there is a bouncing to the right. In the same way, when you have an explosion of a gas here, by purely random path, locally, the individual components interact in a way that the asymmetry, or the original asymmetry where the explosion took place, is propagated. Again, is propagated globally by only local interactions, with no need of any sort of finalism going towards and this is the key point, it is only due to the propagation of the original asymmetry by local interaction. So the idea here is to take up contingency as a key component of the analysis in biology in a way that the entire biomass is seen as a potential of variability. This potential variability happens under major constraint, the left wall, the original asymmetry of the explosion of life, and this original asymmetry locally propagates to the right in a purely random way. The key idea is to choose the right phase space, the phase of possibilities, which is that of biomass of a complexity, which is Gould's suggestion, to understand that any diffusion fully generally, well beyond biology, is based on random walks. And so the local bumpings propagate to the right, the original asymmetry. But then going to more details of this role of randomness, which doesn't deny the relevance of structural stability in biology, both ontogenesis and phylogenesis, is the fact that this variability is at the origin of diversity and is a component of structural stability. This is the other key point that the lesson we learn from stressing contingency as a component of phylogenesis. So the main paper on this is here, but then there is a recent version. All these papers may be downloaded from my web page, and there are lots of more mathematical details that I'm not giving here, just presenting the basic ideas of our work. Okay, I think I'm fine.